Yeah. All right. It's WineShark Wednesday. Welcome, everybody, to WineShark Wednesday with your host, the WineShark. Yep, that's me. I hope everybody's having a good week, or at least in the middle of part of their week so far. Mondays and Tuesdays being what they are, they tend to be kind of my relaxing days around here because Friday through Sunday has been very busy. So I've had a moderately slow start to the week. But, here I am back in the thick of things, talking about wine, and today talking about rosé. It's a fun time coming up with the year, and we have had a lot of marketing over the last couple of years about rosé all day. And because I've been in the mood particularly, had some very excellent examples myself, and wanted to kind of touch base with everybody and say, hey, here's some of the basics. If you may not know, if you do, great. If you don't, if you learn something, all the better for me. But I always like to dispel a couple of myths I hear and just basically talk about how rosés are made. We're not going to deep dive in this episode, but I am going to do a real summer rosé review coming up in probably later June. That will be a real deep dive into stylistic rosés. We're going to probably try a bunch of different ones, and rather than the usual 2 or 3 wines for the show, I might break out 6 or 7 different wines, small quantities, and talk about different grape styles within the rosé category, which will be fun. But this is your primer, so to speak. So rosé, rosado, rosato, blush, among other names, is basically a red-skinned, grape-derived wine. Pardon me, I got a tickle in my throat. That has only spent a little bit of time in contact with its skin. It gets a little hint of color from that skin contact, a little burst of flavor, but not a lot of the tannins and polyphenols and all the other things that come along with the world of red wine. So, minimal contact with the juice is the basic concept. Unlike white wines, you have to make rosé from at least some portion of red-skinned grapes, black-skinned grapes rather, the ones that are designed to make red wine, because that's where they leach that color out. They can have some blends that will have non-black-skinned grapes in there, but it is less frequent. Usually the color variance you see depends on the grape that is the heart of the rosé and or the length of time of method. So let's talk a little bit about we'll talk about method here in just a second. Last point before I want to get to that is like other wines, the base grape does have a flavor impact, has a pretty significant impact on the actual flavor of the juice in the wine that comes out. However, we kind of lump these all together in the categories of rosé. So luckily, I think it's becoming more common where we're seeing wines referred to as a rosé of Zinfandel, a rosé of Cabernet Sauvignon, a rosé of Syrah, a rosé of Grenache. We're talking about the primary grape component in a better way than we have in the past. So tradition hadn't really pointed this that way. This is a good thing in my opinion, and I hope it continues, because that way people can become more familiar with their sub-styles of the rosés that they like, because like many other things I postulate about, or proselytize about rather, it's not all about one thing. There isn't just a grape that does one rosé. There isn't one rosé style. There's a lot of rosé styles. So there you go. Anyway, we're going to do that the whole deep dive here later in the month of June. But let's talk about how rosés are made. First things first, maceration. Probably the most common method is just this limited skin contact method, which means they take the grapes, they crush them, then during that first little bit of crush period, they take the juice away from the skins. Right? They basically press it off and pump it out. So it may spend anywhere from a couple of hours to maybe 48 hours in contact with that skin as the thing begins to ferment. Although that real fermentation process isn't really kicked off until later. The remainder time is later. It's not sitting in contact with its skin during fermentation. Then it's filtered out, aged, rested, and bottled. Okay, so the usual concept of red wine is there's a long skin contact and fermentation that can last anywhere from days to weeks to sometimes nearly up to a month. Extended maceration like that takes a lot of flavor and color out of the grape skins, and that's where red wine gets all of those wonderful characteristics. So this is basically just a mini version of that, just a little tiny hint. That's the bulk of wine of rosé production as we know it. The kind of more traditional way, the sort of double it, a concrete truck apparently. Thank you. Anyway, the more traditional or old school kind of double down method is called the saignée method, or bleed off. Bleed off means that you make a wine at its heart that is going to be made as a red wine. Then in that 2 to 48 hour or so period, a portion of that is pumped away for solo fermentation. So rather than the entire batch being pressed away from its skins, just a small portion of the juice is run off and run to a separate fermentation process. This allows you to continue making a red wine over here that in fact you're actually kind of concentrating the skin to juice ratio a little bit in this process, but you're also getting a nice rosé wine that you could that also from a business perspective that you can construct, ferment, bottle, and sell the very next year, or you're still waiting on your big red wine to be done. Okay, because your red wine, let's say, on a fairly common average, you're going to see anywhere from 6 to 12 to 18 months of aging, bottling, various rackings. There's lots of things that can go on in there, but generally speaking, you're not going to see that red wine for at least a whole year after its production or after its harvest date. So that's a great way to support yourself, is to say, hey, we still got wine for sale this year. It's the rosé of the 2019, and we're selling it in 2020, as an example. So the last thing is the blend method. Probably the most rare. It's usually used in sparkling wines, as far as I know, where we add a small portion, like 5% of a red wine, already made still red wine, to an already made still white wine. You blend them together at the very end, right before bottling, and put it together. So that's where champagne, for instance, does this, so that they get that little hint of, say, Pinot Noir added into the juice to help give that little red kick that gives us a nice pink twinge. Slightly different in flavor profile, but it helps preserve a lot of the delicate yeast flavors and things that the sparkling wine producers, especially when they're producing in traditional method like that, it helps preserve that flavor. Okay, one of the new an interesting blend sparklings right now that has just officially been classified not too long back is Prosecco Rosé. Same idea though, a little bit of blend, a little tiny hint, a couple of drops makes the wine the color. I've heard from students in the past that was how they thought all rosés were made, when in the reality it's the least common of all of them. There are some high-end examples of rosés, but one of the cool things about rosé is because it is quick to market, right? You don't have to hold on to it for a long time. You ferment it, you filter it, you bottle it. You don't have to stand on the thing for very long, and you're putting it out the very next year after the harvest, which is cool because that means overall it is economic to make, and therefore prices can be very reasonable, very, very approachable, very easy to afford off-the-shelf level wine. You can get kind of crazy with some very expensive pieces of property, expensive methods, and of course the ever-present marketing forces of supply, demand, and hype, and you can have some very expensive examples. So your average rosés are really going to run you anywhere in that $10 to $15 range, depending on where you're getting them from. I'm talking here at least about quality examples, not the bulk wine production that you're going to get from, say, Franzia Gallo and their bottom end labels. Okay, you can get those for even cheaper than that. But if a simple by the bottle high quality rosé is usually going to run 10 to 15 bucks. You're going to get the same thing from the rosés that you get that are often imported from Europe, which you might wonder, I'm like, well, how are the prices the same if they also have to pay importing? Well, because the prices over there don't start the same. So in other words, they're inexpensive products overall. They're even accommodating for getting them over here to you allows them to be anywhere in that $10 to $15 range, sometimes as high as 20. But the high-end examples are things like, say, Whispering Angel from Chateau de Clowns. That's a great example of a very popular name that got so popular the demand was far exceeding the supply. At one point in time, the stuff was running like $90 a bottle, which is outrageous when you think about rosé world. But the reality is, it's not. Again, it has nothing to do with that point about the actual product. It has to do with market forces. So be advised, you can pay more than that should you choose. One of the other like popular examples that I've had in the past. That's quite good is the Chateau Miraval, which was produced by Brad and Angelina. So when Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt were married, they fell in love with this winery, purchased it. That got itself a lot of hype. The wine's actually really quite good. At the time that it was very popular, it was like up in the $30, $35 range. Now it's down to a much more reasonable, I think it's right about $20, and it's still a really good example of the style of Provençal rosés that really kind of revitalized the market. So again, we'll talk more about those in June. But most of these wines never see a day of oak. They're all stainless steel, concrete fermented. There are a couple, though, Bandol in France and in Provence, are actually aged in oak up to 4 years, and then they're refined, bottled, and sold. And they can continue to mature in the bottles, very similar to red wines. Some of the more robust styles of wine also have qualities approaching and up to what you would see in the lighter red range, whereas the lightest versions can be as light and effervescent and ethereal as even light white wines, which puts them in that beautiful middle category. They definitely are that bridge between white and red world. So service temperature, though, is usually a little bit warmer than whites, but not by much. It's either at white temperature or barely above. Again, go with robustness as a guide. The more robust the flavors, the bolder the wine, the little warmer you can serve it. But we're usually talking 45 degrees to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so that's your kind of rosé primer there. We've got some example we're gonna try today. As a matter of fact, we've got the grocery store grab today is actually a rosé because, well, that was what the theme was, and they aren't hard to find right now. We're hitting the season, as I said, where last year's rosés are starting to come in here. But this is an example where your WineShark was not paying attention while he was doing his shopping. I actually ended up with a rosé that questionably might be pushing the edge of its lifespan. I ended up with a bottle of 2018 14 Hands from the Chateau Saint Michel owned wineries up in Washington State. I'd seen the label around before, and I believe we've done their cab on this show before, but this was listed price at the grocery store, listed price of $18.99, but the card price was all of $9.99. So we're talking about a $10 difference in price point, which really to me says they're just trying to make it look like it's a wildly high value. So reality is this is a $10 bottle, right? This is exactly what we should be expecting. That's what I would expect from a domestic winery producing wine, producing wines in that similar band. I mean, Chateau Saint Michel and their ilk have a lot of very friendly grocery store level, widely produced wines. So they've got that economy of scale and can afford to give us good prices. So what is the grocery store grab? For those that are not familiar, we have the premise is to get the best value per dollar for wines found at non-specialty and non-big box retailers. While I love those places, not everybody has the beautiful concept, the beautiful ability to be able to shop at a fine wine store. Some just out of convenience, you happen to be at the grocery store, you're going to pick up some wine. You're in a very interesting environment because you don't really have any professionals around to help you out. You're faced with a lot of big name brands that are very competitive for your attention. So the focus that we have here is on reading good wine labels and rewarding wineries that tell us what's in the bottle so that we know what it is we're exactly getting. And whether you're a new to wine person or an experienced wine person, it's a great lesson to learn. So what we want to know, by the way, we choose the wines without prior research. I just go to while I'm doing my shopping, if I've thought of the theme beforehand, I'll get something that matches on theme. Otherwise, sometimes I'll just poke around and pick something that looks interesting, read the label. If it matches what we're looking for, we'll put it on the show. So it's very simple, very random process. Most wines in this range, by the way, price-wise, in that what I would call grocery store range, where you're going to find wines from anywhere from full value wines of the couple dollars, $3, $5, $6, $7 a bottle, all the way up to say $30, $35 a bottle. We're not really going into the luxury wine market that is appearing in some grocery stores, simply because those wines actually are I would put them in a separate class, where they've usually got enough marketing cred to know what you're doing and to be able to see them in advance. So anyway, we want to know what's in the bottle. We want to know where the grape's grown. We want to know what does the wine taste like. In these things, we want easy to understand language, right? If you're going to make a blend, tell us what types of grapes are in the blend and in what percentages. That way, if we like it, we can do it again. We want to know where the grapes are grown. The more specific, the better. Although this is often a function just of the wine's marketing, or rather, what market it is designed for. And now a fire. Man, it is my day for sonic interruption. So then the real kind of key thing is we want to know what the wine tastes like. We want flavor words that we can understand. We want we want to avoid any pretentious funky wine words if possible. And if they're really doing well, we'd love to know what we should be pairing this with on our dinner table, since wine is so often accompanied by food. Okay, so as I said, this week's selection is the 14 Hands Syrah. This is the Rosé of Syrah from Washington State. Now, the one that I have is not listed as a Syrah. It is simply listed as a Rosé. Now, I don't know. I think this is one of those things where, depending on how they've changed their labels, they've even updated their label for 2020 beyond this. I pulled this from their website, as you can tell from their cropping of the image here. But one of the things that really attracted me about this wine, and from a label perspective, is they're all about telling me what it tastes like, from the front to the back to, and I'll show you here in the minute on the back label real quick. They highlight the idea of the flavors as the bright red text that immediately underneath the name of the wine, which I think this is exactly what wineries should be doing. So, as he says here, this Syrah Rosé opens up with delicate aromas of rose petals and rhubarb. Refreshing flavors of melon and strawberries are followed closely by a kick of citrus in the finish. So man, right on the front label, in addition to their fun art that says, hey, check it out, we're referring to horses. When we talk about the hands, we're talking about the size of the horses. And that's our theme, but we're really, really proud of the way the wine tastes, and we're going to put it right on the front label. So then on the back, we kind of get the same thing. 14 Hands Winery, Rosé, Washington State. So we know what type of wine it is. It's a rosé wine. Doesn't tell us what grape. We wish they would. Washington State. Okay, so it's a broad area, not a specific area. That's probably because of how they're harvesting the wines. Again, at this level, they're probably targeting a price point that causes them to reach pretty far to get good quality, or as good a quality they can get for a good cost. So it's not an estate-specific wine. And then there's this big red, sentence: refreshing flavors of melon and strawberries with a kick of citrus. That is their action statement right there. And I really like the fact that they're leading with it. Then they go on to their marketing thing, their personal text second. 14 Hands are inspired by the unbridled spirit of the wild horses that once inhabited the Columbia River Basin and stood a mere 14 hands tall. Those are smaller ponies for the non-horse types. Okay, well, not ponies, but smaller horses. Anyway, the terrain that gave these small horses their endurance and strength now feeds our vines. Our wines celebrate these horses and the heritage of the lands in which they once roamed. The rest of the stuff you'll see here is the usual governmental warnings to scare you and make sure that you don't do dumb things. Also has the idea that it is 13.0% alcohol by volume, which I believe mine is as well. So the only thing that I'm worried about here, the only concern that I actually have, is that I've got a 2018, and if you guys have attended one of my tastings before, and we've talked about wine aging, most of the wines that you're going to get are at the grocery store, at the big box store, at your liquor store, are designed to be consumed at the time of purchase or within 2 to 3 years. Rosés and lighter styles of wine generally aren't meant to hold on to for very long. They're not age-worthy wines. They don't have the structure that is required to make those complicated chemical interactions get better with time. So they kind of lose their luster. We're going to find out whether I made a mistake or not. But the coloration on this wine, I would still bet that this is a Syrah-based wine. It has got a nice coppery salmon color to it, not a bright lighter pink, so it doesn't have some of the indicators of some of the more Provence style stuff. Rosé wines can range anywhere from pale pink, almost light rose petal pink, through big bright bubblegum to salmon to copper twinged, and even into a dark almost cranberry red. So it's a broad range of rosé colors that again have different grapes at their hilts and sometimes have different blends as well. I tried a Provençal wine last week that had, I think, 5 different grape styles in it, but it was blush pink. I mean, very light in color, even though if I recall correctly, one of the wines in the mix was a Cabernet Sauvignon, which is a big dark skinned grape, right? So anyway, fact is, the color can say something about the wine, the style of wine, but it doesn't necessarily say, oh, I can look at that and I can spot a single grape, unless it says, hey, I'm 100% of this grape. Don't be too sure. So anyway, methodology. Let's get into this though and find out what we got here. One of the things we like to ask ourselves, I kind of do an abbreviated sort of review, but the real things that we want to know is this wine well executed? Is it on style for what it's claiming to be? And is it worth the price tag? Okay, that's kind of, and by the way, does it live up to the flavor words that it's saying on the bottle? So, as their mission statement says here, we are looking for refreshing flavors of melon and strawberries with a kick of citrus. So, yeah, they mentioned rose petals on the nose, but I'm not getting really any of that. And the wine definitely, the wine I've got, it smells a little on the age side. I'm a little worried that I've gotten a hold of one, which, by the way, says something unfortunate that we all need to remember, and that is to check those vintage dates when it applies to the correct wine. Because what I'm getting here is I'm a little worried. Okay, it is not as fruitful as it ought to be. There is a little bit of hint of unripe watermelon and a little hint of citrus, but this wine is aging out. The wine that I have picked up is not at that bright not sparkling, but that bright, acidic, fruit-forward flavor that I would expect out of this wine. Not only from the label, simply from the style. This is an example that I would love to bring to a off flavors example of what wine tastes like when it's getting too old. Because if you were to buy this wine, taste it, say, oh, I really like this, and then you got the next bottle and it tastes totally different, or vice versa. If you had the 2020 right now or the 2019 that tasted more youthful, vibrant, and fresh, then you turned around and got one of these, you're like, what the hell happened? Oh, you forgot to look at the date. So that vintage rating, especially for wines that don't have aging potential, is really important. And unfortunately, the grocery store is one of the places you can run into that. That is a sad reality there of that. So I'm going to kind of reserve judgment on the execution, style, and price tag here because I really want to try this wine at its peak. I don't want to let my mistake because I wasn't paying attention in the store affect my opinion of the actual wine. I shall not besmirch thee, tiny horse. I shall not besmirch thee. I mean, the weird thing is the wine's not bad, meaning it is not broken to the point where it is undrinkable. It is simply not what it's supposed to be. It's just got that, it's worn a little thin. It is not tasting up to its max potential. So what I may do is I may sangria the hell out of this. So great thing to do with your wines that when you don't have a true flaw, something like oxidization, cork taint, sulfur problems, things like that, muddiarization. If you don't have if the wine isn't broken to that point, you might be able to just use it for its alcohol content and spruce it up a bit. This, with a little bit of seltzer and some fresh fruit, perfectly drinkable, right? It's providing the backbone. The rest of the stuff is providing the fruit flavors. The wine's not having to do all the heavy lifting. So that's probably what's going to happen to that bottle right over there. But, well, lots of lessons learned. An interesting thing, we hadn't actually had that happen, and it wasn't until I sat down, by the way, to write the notes for this about an hour ago when I went, oh, I wasn't paying attention there, and this may have a problem. So yeah, is it worth the price? I certainly think if it's at its hopes rate, but we'll find out next time. So $9, and I will. You can expect this to happen one more time. So what's upcoming as well? Then, without any further on things on that, we've got the final weekend of the Scarborough Renaissance Festival coming up this weekend. So 3 days of me out there at the festival doing the World of Wines with Flynn Markley. So it is Flynn's favorites weekend, which means we are doing stuff that I love, meaning stuff that Glenn loves that are his favorite styles of wine. So gonna see my California favorites. I think I brought in some bubbly from France. I got my round reds in there. Definitely I've got a Zinfandel because I'm a Zinfandel nut. So that's gonna be fun. Now, the tickets online are sold out, have been for a long time. But to repeat the message again, I've always got tickets on sale the day of. It is weather dependent, however, how many are available. So please show up early. If you're going to show up at the festival, come in, come see me, get your tickets, then go have a turkey on a turkey leg, or X on a stick. Okay, so take care of your vaccinations first. Also, if you don't want to attend one of those tastings, I do have a few slots left for private picnics. So the private picnic is basically the advanced version of that. It's only for 4 to 6 people, so it's just you and me and a gourmet charcuterie board with cheeses and fresh fruits, and it's the fancy people's version thereof. But you got to reserve with me privately, so those are great. Reach out on Facebook, reach out any of my social methods, and contact me, and I will get you hooked up. Next and lastly, well, no, not next and lastly, next, but not lastly, 27 May, that's tomorrow, is we're doing Will It Blend, the final episode, The New World Reds. We're going to have a couple of my favorite wines that kicked off the trend. When we talk about red blends in America in the last 10 years, they've really come a long way. In fact, it's one of the things that was really interesting about this show is to see the old world influences and the new. Well, guess what? The new world influences certainly gained a lot of traction with wine drinkers, and they are now probably one of the most popular wine categories. So we're going to talk about how that got started with some of the wines that our man Dave Finney made. And then we're also going to visit up in Sonoma with one of my favorite wines that is just silly to drink, called Sexual Chocolate. So tickets are still available for that. That's a Zoom meeting online tomorrow night. Got nothing better to do. Come hang out with me and learn about wine. Then last but never least, 13 June, the Summer Splash at the Reunion Tower. So that's going to be the start of a 3-part series over the summer where we're going to talk about light, fun, awesome drinking wines for warm Texas weather. Because, well, that's where we are down here. But I'm sure that even in your less cold or less warm places, you can appreciate light, easy drinking. So we're going to do that. We're going to talk about stuff to go with the grill, all kinds of fun stuff. So, okay. Anyway, I hope everybody would have a good day. I see that Dave and Mary and Donna had joined us, but had said they had a bad internet connection. Totally understandable. But no worries. That's why these things play back. It's not just a live show. So you can check us out there. Leave your comments and ask your questions there, because that helps the channel and helps us, answer questions that lots of other people might be having. Gets that interaction up. So if you like what we're doing, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. We're growing slowly but surely, and I love being able to chat with you guys about wine, and hopefully on a more detailed stage with a in-person tasting, or see you on Zoom, and we can do this together rather than one way, because that's always more fun for me, honestly. But share with a wine-loving friend, help the channel grow. If you really would like what we're doing, support over on Patreon is greatly appreciated. My Patreons are amazing folks that have helped this project get off the ground and stay going in the right direction. So we got cool stuff like free discounts, early ticket access, tour dates. They're going to get first access to the tours that are coming this year. By the way, so theoretically, we're talking about an October tour to Texas and 2 November tours to California. So they'll get access to that first, and then everybody else. So there's a benefit to that as well. Plus a lot of other detailed content and stuff that I don't put out necessarily on YouTube or Facebook. So Patreon is awesome. Support us there. I hope you guys have a wonderful week. I will hopefully see some of you tomorrow, and we'll talk about red blends. I'm going to go see if I can find some watermelon and make this into an awesome adult beverage. So until next time, guys, I have been your WineShark. Cheers.